Hello everybody, how y'all doing? My name is Kai, and I'm excited today. Today I'm going to be giving a presentation about my journey in the climbing community and my complicated relationship with the community, because this has definitely been a space where I've felt the most embraced and the most celebrated at a lot of times, but it's also a space where I've felt the most lost, the most confused, and the most misunderstood. So I wanted to take you guys through my journey as a climber and kind of just my process of learning how to find that balance and be able to be in a space to appreciate the sport for all it has to offer. All right, next slide. So let's rewind the clock to the beginning. So I started climbing at 6. Actually, we could actually rewind the clock a little earlier than that. Before I could even walk, my mother used to have to put away all the baby gates in the house because I would climb over them before I learned how to walk. And I used to eat lunch on the basketball hoops and climb all the brick seams of buildings every time we would walk in public. And I found the sport because my mother's a college professor. Shout out to teachers, by the way. So my mother's a college professor, and she had just finished classes. She had brought me up to her to work. She was talking to her boss outside of the school, and at 6 years old, I looked to my right at the 50-foot flagpole, and I thought, oh, that looks fun to climb. So I shimmied my way all the way to the top, and as you can imagine, everybody surrounding was freaking out, including my mother. But a lady walked by, she helped me get down, and as my mother was apologizing profusely, she pulled out her purse, put out a sticky note, wrote the address to a local climbing gym, and gave it to my mother, and said that he should try rock climbing. It's at least safer than whatever he was doing over there. So I went into the gym, and I don't think I've ever really left. It was one of those things where, as someone who's neurodivergent, having ADHD, for some reason, sitting in front of a climbing wall, I could do it for hours at a time like no other activity. Extremely special to me, and I still hold near and dear to my heart. So at a very young age, I realized I was a little different in both of the worlds I existed in. When I walked into climbing, I was the only black face in the room in any space. A local competition, an outdoor area, no matter what was going on, I was always the only black face. And even at 6 years old, I noticed, and it made me feel a little uncomfortable, not seeing anybody else like me except for the people I brought along. And when I went back home, and I would tell people about how much I liked rock climbing, everybody looked at me sideways, because the first thing that came out of their mouths is, we don't do that. Black people don't climb. It's like, also, you're hanging out in spaces that are a little unsafe. People question my sanity, people question my safety, people question my mother for letting me go there. And it felt a little bit awkward. I feel like I didn't belong. But one thing that I can give the climbing community credit for is that they never made me feel like I was different, especially not for the color of my skin. Everybody's a little bit quirky, everybody is very accepting, and we all had a common interest that we loved to do, and so it just didn't matter. As long as we climbed together and appreciated each other for who we were, that's all that mattered. Climbing has always been a very special community. Climbing is probably one of the only spaces I've ever been in where I've met people who just willingly give the shirts off of their back for no reason, even if they don't know you, which where I come from is very strange. But that openness, that willingness to embrace and accept people blindly is what made climbing such a safe space for me. I feel like I've built some of my strongest friendships in life through this sport. And at every path where I thought that things were coming to an end and I reached the end of the road and there wasn't anywhere else to go, there was always someone there in climbing to help me through. Whether it was the fact that me and my single mother, couldn't afford to travel to competitions or afford gym memberships, there's always someone there to step in and help financially support or drive us to places or carpool. There's always someone there, a lighthouse along the way to help me in my journey. So for that, I'm forever thankful for you guys. Next slide. Oh, sorry. No, go back. You're right. All right, so early on in my climbing, people started to realize I had a little bit of potential. When I was 9, I made my first U.S. team, and when I was 10 years old, I won my first national championships, and I went to the Pan American Games and won 3 gold medals. Also around this time, my friends pressured me enough to actually get into outdoor climbing, and I was climbing high-end 513 pretty quickly, which 15 years ago was like, groundbreaking like stuff. Nowadays, I feel like little kids are doing everything at a high level, but I was really doing something back then. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love the sport. I was experiencing some success at an early age, and I was just having a great time. But when people started seeing me succeed so much, they started assigning expectations to my accomplishments and what they thought I should achieve. And they also started pointing out the obvious, which was my size. Even as a kid, I was always the largest kid in any group I was in climbing. And even my coaches would look to my parents and my family to see what I would look to. Because in general, in climbing, the mold of a professional high-level athlete is being smaller and being thinner. And for some context, my mother is 5'8", and my father is 6'9". On both sides of my family, mother and father, there is not a single man under 6 foot. And most of us far exceed that mark. And no offense, Mama, when I practiced this, you weren't in the audience, so I apologize. But our body types aren't necessarily skinny. Naturally, on both sides of my family, we're pretty stocky people, and so it was pretty clear what I was going to look like. And that body type defied the rules of the sport. And so there was always this constant pressure for me, if I wanted to succeed, to try to look like what success had been put in front of me. So at a young age, I associated success with thinness. And I tried to fight biology as much as I possibly could. And for a while, it worked. By the time I was 15, I was holding every title that was possible for me. I was the reigning youth national champion, the reigning youth Pan American champion, the reigning youth world champion. I won open nationals in my first year of eligibility going into my first World Cup season. In 1 year, when I was 13, I jumped a whole number grade and went from 13C to climbing 14C. And by the time I was winning my first Open Nationals, I had climbed my first 14D in a 9A. I was getting all these opportunities, climbing around the world, living out my dreams, and being able to appreciate some really cool spaces in the world. So this one is the New River Gorge, back when I was 13. And actually, this is a photo of me right before I climbed my first 514. The day before, actually. I showed up at the crag, and it was raining the day before, so the whole crag and the rock was seeping. And my mom was like, I guess we should go home, but I told her that let's just warm up on the climb and see how things go and touch holes and see if I can get up. So I started climbing. I climbed all the way up, past all the jugs to where I was supposed to stop and kept going. I climbed through the crux and the wet seams and got all the way near the top. I looked down at my mom and I was like, should I stop? But she was like, absolutely not, keep going. So climbed all the way to the chains, clipped them, and climbed my first 514. 4 days later, I went to the River Gorge, and my friend recommended that I try a climb called Ultra Perm, which is a 13D, which was well in my comfort zone. At that time, I didn't think that anything beyond 14A was possible. So I remember going up this climb that he suggested for me, getting it in maybe 1 or 2 takes and being like, oh, that was fun. I'll try that again next time. And once I got down, he gave me the guidebook and told me that the climb I had actually been on was a climb called Southern Smoke, which was 14C. And I was floored. I was like, I can't climb that hard. What are you talking about? But once I realized that it was in my abilities and I could do it, I managed to send it 2 days later and climb my first 14C. Another cool place I got to climb was in Flatanger, Norway, with my good friend Ashima. You may have heard of her, I don't know. But back then, we were filming for the Real Rock Film Festival, and we were invited to climb in Flatanger. And what was most notable about this trip was the seams dripping wet with water. It was sun all year round, and anytime we were climbing, we basically had to fight the weather in order to climb. And my mother came up with the brilliant idea of sticking tampons in the cracks. Would have never guessed. I know, she's onto something, I'm just telling you. But she was like, if you want to redirect the water, stick tampons in the cracks. None of us thought about that. But we went to the store, bought tampons, redirected the water, and were able to climb on some of our projects. So that was pretty cool. Yep. And here's some photos of me climbing my first, and so far only, 14D when I was 15. It was a week after I won Open Nationals, my first one that I was able to compete in, and I decided for spring break that this is what I wanted my spring break to be about. So I flew all the way to Spain, got there, and immediately got sick with tonsillitis. Why I got tonsillitis? Well, actually I had it a month prior, but I forgot to finish my antibiotics. So I showed up there, and with no antibiotics, and in a small village in the middle of Spain, we had to walk into the city center and find the local chemist to mix my antibiotics from scratch. With only a week and a half of trip, I didn't think this climb was going to happen. And then there was a photographer there. I felt a lot of pressure, but I was able to get over my sickness, start climbing on the route, and on the very last day, managed to send the route. Super special to me. So at this time, I professionally was at the top of my game, but physically, personally, I was going through a lot. My body was revolting on itself because I had deprived it of the nutrients that it needed, of the care and the health that it needed. I was experiencing all kinds of injuries, chronic tendinitis, fractures in my back and my fingers and different parts of my body. And at one point, I went to the doctor, and the doctor told me that I was a fraction away from liver failure, and that if I didn't practice healthier eating habits, that it could cost me my life, and that I had to change my lifestyle. And to me, that was one of the hardest things I had to ever hear, not because my health was at risk, but because in my mind, I was like, this is the only way I can be successful. This is my livelihood. And so trying to change those habits took a really long time for me mentally and physically to overcome. And by the time I was 17 and I was applying for colleges and I was moving on to the next level, I was exhausted. My body had exhausted all the effort it had to give, and mentally I felt like I had given all I could to the sport. And so I had to take a break. So I went to college, and the pandemic happened. And in that process, I managed, go ahead. And in that process, I made a few promises to myself if I was ever going to return back to climbing. I promised that I'd never starve myself again to achieve my goals. I promised never again to allow others to determine my relationship with my sport. And I promised to never give myself grace and prioritize my joy and my passion above any singular goals. You can go next slide. So, as this sport enters the Olympic arena and it becomes more commercialized, I can only hope that our community can preserve some of its core values, that we can continue to use our deep connections with nature and with each other and with our collective journeys to elevate each other to new heights in a positive way. Thank you. Yep. And one more thing I want to highlight before I leave the stage is that even that I've set goals for myself in the future, and I plan on climbing harder than I ever have, and even starting this fall moving on, I definitely don't plan on compromising any of those core promises that I made to myself. I want them to be sustainable, and I want to be able to set an example that even when you grow and you change from a kid into an adult, even if you don't look like the person in the magazines achieving those 515 grades and establishing another level of climbing, that you can achieve success in any body that you're in and from any perspective that you live in, because climbing is for everyone and we should be able to embrace everyone in it. Thank you.